All right, so we're back, and today we're really gonna like dive deep into something that I think everyone's, wondering about.
Yeah.
Trump's second term, specifically those critical first 100 days. And we've been going through a ton of material, news articles,
Mm.
policy plans, expert opinions, all that
It's
stuff.
a lot.
It is, and we really want to, you know, help everyone listening make sense of it all. Not just like what Trump's saying he's going to do, but like, okay, what could this actually look like?
Right. Like, what are the real world ripple effects?
Right.
What are the points of friction? What should we be looking out for? Because this is all unfolding so fast.
Yeah, and it's so complex. I mean, even the experts are kind of like, well, we'll see. So, we want to arm you with the information you need to follow along and make sense of it all as it happens.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth emphasizing, even though it's early days, those first 100 days really set the tone. For a whole presidency, it's a chance to kind of solidify a legacy. Or in Trump's case, he seems to be doubling down on his core agenda.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of that agenda, it's ambitious, to say the least. Huge promises. The question is, can he actually pull it off? And where are the potential, roadblocks, the pushback? Let's start with immigration.
Okay.
Because that was like front and center the whole campaign.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's already like sparking so much debate. I mean, the guy comes out and says on day one, I'm launching the largest deportation program of criminals in American history.
Big statement.
Yeah. So bold statement for sure. But I mean, how realistic is that really?
Right. And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because, okay, so Trump's own border czar, Tom Homan, right? He estimates they'd need at least $86 billion
Wow.
just to make this happen. And think about it, expanding detention facilities, they'd have to hold over 100,000 people.
Yeah.
We're talking a huge jump from the current 34,000.
Right.
Plus, there's already this massive backlog, like 3.6 million cases just sitting in immigration courts.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a monumental undertaking.
So even if he gets the money, it sounds like this mass deportation thing might be more of a slow burn.
Exactly. And then you got to factor in the economic side of things, too.
Right.
The American Business Immigration Coalition, they estimate that, if Trump really goes all in on this, agricultural output could plummet.
Yeah.
Like $30 to $60 billion drop. And the construction industry, which relies so heavily on undocumented labor, they'd be hit hard.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Really hard.
And I mean, we can't just talk numbers, right? There's the human cost. I mean, mass deportations, that's families being torn apart, people being ripped from their lives, their jobs.
That's a huge human cost.
And I remember reading, I think it was Newt Gingrich who warned that if the optics of this aren't handled carefully, public support could just poof, disappear.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's a key point. Will people, will the public actually tolerate that kind of hardline approach, especially if we start seeing these personal stories, the hardship all over the news?
It's a powder keg politically.
No, absolutely.
Okay, so it's clear immigration is like priority number one for Trump.
Definitely.
But he's not just about deportations, right? He wants to basically shut down all the ways that migrants have been using to get into the U.S., like bringing back Remain in Mexico, expanding expedited removal, ending catch and release.
Right. It's multi-pronged for sure.
And then there's the even more controversial part. Ending birthright citizenship, like by executive order.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this would basically target, the children of undocumented immigrants and short-term visitors who are, born here in the U.S.
Right.
And here's where it gets really tricky because there's no like legal consensus on whether a president can even do that. It would probably end up in a Supreme Court battle. And I mean, the implications are huge.
Oh, totally. He's essentially going after the 14th Amendment, which, guarantees citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental principle. And, if he actually tries to change it, we're talking like legal and political earthquake.
So it's a reminder that even with the second term, there are limits to what he can do.
Oh, for sure.
He's going to face pushback from the courts, Congress, the public on all of this stuff.
Absolutely. And speaking of pushback, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another area where Trump's known for his, strong stance, tariffs.
Right.
He once said, tariffs, the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary. So Clearly, he's a fan.
He's not shying away this time.
No, not at all. In fact, it seems like he's doubling down.
Yeah, he's proposing a 25% tariff on all goods from Mexico and Canada. I mean, those are our biggest trading partners.
I know, it's a lot.
It's a lot. And then a 10% increase on existing tariffs for China. That's a pretty big escalation from the first term.
It is a major move, and one that has economists and industry leaders pretty worried, I have to say.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, they're warning about, higher prices for consumers.
That makes sense.
Harm to U.S. farmers, and some even say it could cripple the American auto industry.
Wow.
Yeah, and the Canadian ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, she's already said that Canada will retaliate, make U.S. products more expensive there, which would probably push Canadians to look elsewhere for their goods.
Right.
So it's, it really could be setting the stage for a trade war.
A trade war.
Yeah, and remember, Trump has even threatened like a 100% tariff on BRICS nations if they, and I quote, mess with the U.S. dollar.
So he's playing hardball on the global economic stage, but I mean, what's the cost of that? Not just for us, but for everyone.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Trump seems to think he can use tariffs to, strong-arm better trade deals, protect American jobs, all that. But a lot of experts are saying, this is going to backfire. It'll end up hurting American businesses and consumers in the long run.
So this aggressive approach, it might actually create more problems than it solves.
It's definitely a risk.
Yeah.
And one we need to be paying close attention to, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of wild how he's like going after these economic issues, with so much force.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about taxes yet. He's also planning to shake things up there, like big time. He's promised to extend those 2017 tax cuts, the
TCJA.
The TCJA, right? Which were a huge win, obviously, for corporations, wealthy Americans.
Good.
But it's going to be tricky. I mean, they're saying it could cost like $5 trillion over 10 years. Even some Republicans are kind of like, I don't know about this.
Yeah. I mean, extending the TCJA, that could blow up the deficit, and that worries, the fiscal conservatives, for sure. But there's another kind of wrinkle in all of this. Representatives from those high-tax states, like New York, California, they're really pushing to raise the cap on the SALT deduction.
Oh, right. The SALT deduction, which that lets people deduct, state and local taxes from their federal taxes.
Exactly.
That cap really hit those folks hard.
Oh, yeah. And, with the Republicans only having a slim majority in the House, those votes from the SALT states, those are crucial for Trump to get anything passed.
Yeah.
He's going to have to, really balance those different factions in his own party. Not an easy task.
Not easy at all. So this tax extension, I mean, it's going to be a tough sell.
For sure. And then on top of that, he's, thrown out all these other tax promises.
Mm-hmm.
Eliminating taxes on tips,
right?
Social Security, cutting the corporate tax rate even more. I mean, those proposals they're going to face even more resistance, especially with all the worry about the deficit.
Right. So domestically, he's really looking to make some waves. But we also can't forget about his foreign policy moves.
Absolutely.
Everything is going to be under a microscope there, too.
For sure.
I mean, he promised to end the war in Ukraine before inauguration. Obviously, that didn't happen.
No, it didn't. But his team is working on a peace deal.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Zelensky seems pretty optimistic about Trump's involvement. And they're saying there might even be a meeting with Putin in the works. It's a long shot, but not impossible.
Okay, and what about the Israel-Hamas ceasefire? I mean, Trump's already taking credit for that, saying it happened because he won the election.
Well, politically, that's a smart move.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's actually true. I mean, the negotiations were already happening before the election, but he's framing it as, proof of his deal-making skills.
Right.
He's a strong leader. He can get things done on the world stage.
Makes sense. Speaking of getting things done, the AP is reporting that Trump is planning over 100 executive orders. Yeah, many of them specifically targeting policies from the Biden era that he wants to undo. That's a lot of executive power.
Yeah, it is. It's a bold move. But it's going to cause a lot of controversy, for sure. Remember, executive orders, those can be challenged in court pretty easily.
Yeah.
And with so many coming out at once, I mean, it's going to be a legal mess.
So where is he focusing all this, executive firepower?
Well, energy's a big one.
Yeah, okay.
He wants to scrap a lot of the climate protections and, boost oil, gas, and coal production. It's clear he's putting energy independence first, even if it means putting the environment at risk.
And what about deregulation?
That's another key area. He's going after banking, crypto, agriculture, basically undoing a lot of the regulations that the Biden administration put in place.
Gotcha. And there's education too, right?
Yes. He's really going after schools with what he calls woke policies, saying he wants to defund any school that teaches, critical race theory, gender studies, things like that. He also wants to ban transgender athletes from women's sports and get rid of all the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
So it sounds like he's basically declaring war on, what he sees as liberal overreach in education and social issues, which, these are hot button topics for sure. It'll definitely fire up his base.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's also going to provoke a ton of opposition from Democrats and progressive groups.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. These are like core American values, identity, all the
right.
Trump's tapping into this like sense of anxiety that some Americans have. Feeling like their way of life is being threatened.
Yeah.
It's a powerful political strategy, even if it means dividing the country even more.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in. And it's important to understand both sides of these issues, right?
Absolutely. These aren't just like simple policy debates. This is about what it means to be American, what we value, how we want our society to work.
So where does this leave us? We've got immigration crackdowns, potential trade wars, tax battles, a ton of executive orders, and this brewing cultural clash. It seems like his second term is going to be even crazier than his first.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? Trump's definitely saying he's not afraid of a fight. He's willing to push the limits of his power, challenge the status quo, even if it means more division.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting 4 years.
Interesting and potentially unsettling, I would say.
Definitely. And for you listening out there, it's so crucial to stay informed, engage with all of this, and form your own opinions.
Right. Don't just passively watch the news. Think critically about the information you're getting and ask yourself, what does this mean for me, for my community?
Such a good point. It's almost like he wants to see how much we can handle.
Yeah, he does seem to thrive on that, the disruption, challenging the norms. It's definitely part of his strategy.
Which makes predicting what's actually going to happen, impossible. It's like trying to, forecast the weather in a hurricane.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
We can, see the big forces at play, but the actual path, the impact, that's all still up in the air. And we can't forget, these first 100 days, they're really just the beginning.
Right.
They set the tone, lay the groundwork, but the real test is going to be, can he turn these, these big promises into actual results?
So, okay, let's say you were advising Trump. What would you tell him to focus on first? Where are the biggest opportunities, but also, the biggest risks?
That's the question, isn't it? If I had his ear, I'd say look for areas where you might actually get some bipartisan support, like infrastructure, maybe even some parts of immigration reform. A few early wins, especially if they involve working with the other side, that could build some momentum, show that he's, willing to compromise.
It sounds good in theory, but, is it realistic? Looking at his track record, he's much more comfortable attacking than, finding common ground.
You're not wrong. That's definitely a concern.
Yeah.
But a second term, that's a chance to kind of rewrite your legacy.
Yeah.
Right? Does he want to be remembered as the guy who divided everyone?
Yeah.
Or the guy who brought people together? The decisions he makes now, those are going to determine that.
Okay, so what about the risks? What should we be most worried about as all of this plays out?
I'd say the biggest risk is that, this aggressive approach he's taking, both at home and on the world stage, it could blow up in his face. Alienating our allies with these trade wars, making the political divide even worse here at home.
Right.
Provoking conflicts with other countries that we don't need. Those are real dangers with real consequences.
It's like he's walking a tightrope, and every time he does something provocative, the rope gets a little bit shakier.
Exactly. And it's not just about him, know. We, the people, we have a role to play in all of this, too. We need to stay informed, talk about these things, hold our leaders accountable, and, participate in the process. The future of the country really does depend on that.
Well said. We've covered a lot in this deep dive. Immigration, tariffs, taxes, foreign policy, the war on woke.
It's been a lot.
It has. It's like a crash course in Trump's, ambitious, maybe even volatile agenda. But like we said, this is just the beginning.
Yeah, the story's still being written.
Exactly. And we'll be here to help you make sense of it all.
Absolutely.
But for now, I think the most important thing is to remember.
Knowledge is power.
Yes. The more you understand what's going on, the better prepared you'll be to, deal with whatever comes next. So stay informed, stay engaged, and stay curious.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, There's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider, more questions to ask. That's what makes all of this so fascinating and honestly so important.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more, in-depth looks at the issues that matter most. But until then, keep learning.